The big board over her head went blood red. Every flight number on the screen flipped from on time to grounded in a rolling wave, like a curtain coming down on the entire Christmas Eve rush. The glass-walled operations room at the tiny West Texas airport went silent. Rain hammered the runway so hard it looked like it was boiling lightning strobing just beyond the control tower. In the center of it all stood Morgan Hale, one hand hovering over the emergency override key, the other clenched around her phone as it buzzed with angry calls from executives in Dallas and New York. "If you ground them, our on-time numbers tank for the quarter," a voice was shouting in her ear. "You understand what that does to the merger?" On the other side of the glass, she could see families pressed against the windows, kids in Christmas pajamas, holding stuffed animals, soldiers in uniform with duffel bags at their feet. Closer in the dimly lit gate area, a man in a reflective vest knelt to wrap his own airline jacket around a shivering little girl with braided hair, then looked up at Morgan through the glass and shook his head once. "Don't do it. Don't send them into that." Her mother's last voicemail, saved for 20 years, echoed in her memory. "I'll be home by midnight, sweetheart. Don't wait up." Morgan took a breath, hit the key, and watched every departure on the board flip to canceled. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight, and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. The story doesn't start with that red board. It starts 12 hours earlier with a woman who believed numbers and schedules mattered more than anything. Morgan Hale was 35 Chief Operating Officer of Sky Vista Airlines and the kind of person whose day lived in 15-minute blocks on 3 different devices. She woke up on Christmas Eve in a glass condo in downtown Dallas to the glow of another earnings report and the dull ache between her shoulders that never really went away anymore. Her mother had been a flight attendant, the kind who knew every regular by name and brought extra cookies for nervous kids. She'd died on a Christmas Eve flight when Morgan was 15. After that, holidays stopped being special and turned into something to outwork, outrun, and out-organize. If she was busy enough, she didn't have to remember. So Morgan built a life where being busy was the whole point. Her father retired to Florida and remarried. They spoke twice a year, polite and shallow. She never had kids, never had time. And the closest thing to family was the framed Sky Vista route map on her office wall and a stack of awards for operational excellence. On paper, she was a success story, the youngest COO in the airline's history, the architect of a new cost-cutting plan that investors loved and employees whispered about in break rooms. The plan would close smaller maintenance spaces, automate ground operations, and reallocate hundreds of jobs in the name of efficiency. She told herself it was necessary, that safety and reliability came first, that people would understand eventually. That morning, as the Dallas skyline glowed cold and blue outside her window, her inbox filled with weather alerts. A slow-moving storm line over New Mexico, thunderstorms building over West Texas, a possible impact to regional operations bulletin from the FAA. Her CEO wanted every possible seat in the air. The board wanted strong on-time numbers to show at January's merger meeting. Morgan was the one responsible for making it all look smooth on paper, no matter how rough it felt on the ground. "Take the company jet," her boss had said. "Pop into Amarillo. Look decisive. Calm the staff. Let them see the future is automated, not personal. Then fly back in time for the holiday broadcast." So that was the plan, a quick in-and-out visit to a little regional airport Sky Vista barely noticed on its maps. Shake hands. Give a speech about efficiency in a changing industry. Be back in Dallas before dinner alone with a microwave meal and emails. But when the jet touched down in Amarillo late that afternoon, the airfield already smelled like rain and jet fuel and something electric building in the clouds. By the time she walked into the cramped terminal, she could feel every eye on her Sky Vista badge. And she could see on a corkboard by Gate 3 a mess of handwritten notes pinned over each other. If you need diapers, see Maria at Gate 2. Stranded Ramon has extra blankets. Veterans coffees on me. D. Carter, ramp crew. Morgan frowned at the board, at the tired faces of the ground crew, at the looming wall of storm outside the windows. And then the first thunderclap shook the glass. The lights flickered, and the operations computer on the counter in front of her went black. The storm swallowed the runway so completely that the terminal windows reflected nothing but ghosted silhouettes and the dim ceiling lights behind them. Morgan stood at the center of the operations room, sleeves rolled up rainwater still on her blazer from the dash across the tarmac. The grounded board announcement she'd just pushed through hung heavy in the air. Phones were ringing. Radios crackled with clipped voices. And every set of eyes in the cramped room seemed to pivot toward her. At first, the judgment was quiet, side glances, whispers behind hands, the kind of tension that builds in places where people feel forgotten by headquarters. But it didn't stay quiet for long. A tall man in a soaked maintenance jacket stepped forward, jaw clenched. His name tag read W. Connor, but the weariness in his eyes made him look older than whatever number was stitched there. "So that's it," he said. "Just shut us down from 400 miles away because a spreadsheet says storms cost money." Morgan kept her posture steady. I grounded the flights because radar shows 2 storm lines converging. It wasn't about money. "Everything is about money to people in your office," Connor snapped back. "You don't know what it's like here. You don't see parents trying to get home. You don't see soldiers praying they make it in time for their kids' first Christmas. But you see the merger numbers. Bet those are clear as day." A murmur rippled through the room, agreement, resentment, a brewing storm inside to match the one outside. Morgan swallowed, willing her voice to stay even. "I'm trying to prevent anyone from taking off into a cell with wind shear warnings. It's convenient," someone muttered. "She flies in on a private jet and tells us what safety is." The sting hit harder than she expected. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then scanned the room until her gaze landed on someone she hadn't noticed before. A teenage girl, maybe 16, sitting on a metal bench near the back wall with a backpack at her feet. She looked like she'd come straight from a shift at the airport cafe, apron still on sleeves rolled up her curly hair frizzing from the humidity. And though she wasn't part of the staff hurling the accusations, she watched Morgan carefully, almost studying her. Her father, Morgan, recognized the man as the one who'd wrapped his jacket around the little girl earlier, stood beside her hand, resting protectively on her shoulder. His Sky Vista badge read R. Dalton, Ramp Crew. Morgan suddenly realized the teenager wasn't watching with anger. She was watching with fear. The kind of fear kids feel when adults fight over decisions that could break them. That's when Dalton stepped forward, wiping rain from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. "Ma'am," he said politely. At first, the teams worked doubles all week to keep holiday traffic moving. They're stretched thin, and if you shut this place down, folks will miss connections. Kids will sleep in chairs. Families will be stuck here all night. You might be doing what you think is right, but from down here, it feels like you're punishing the little guys. Punish. The word hit her like a thrown stone. Punish because she chose caution. Punish because she listened to radar, not revenue. Punish because she remembered what losing a parent in the air felt like. Morgan steadied herself. "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm preventing a disaster in the making." Connor scoffed. "Funny how you didn't prevent the disaster you brought with you." The room grew still. Dalton winced. "Bill, come on." But Connor wasn't done. "We all know why you're really here. Bring your corporate smile, check a few boxes, then fly back out while we stay behind cleaning up the mess of whatever magic trick Sky Vista tries next." Maybe your big bosses in Dallas think budgets matter more than bodies, but we're the ones who hold the line." Morgan could feel the pressure working its way up her spine, crawling under her skin, lighting every nerve. She wasn't used to being challenged like this. Not openly, not ferociously. Her world revolved around boardrooms where people smiled politely before sinking the knife. Out here, the knife wasn't hidden. She wanted to tell them she'd grown up around airports, that she used to sit at gate 14 waiting for her mother to come home, that she knew the taste of fear when texts went unanswered and weather worsened, that she'd lived the consequence of pushing through storms. Instead, she stood still and took it. "We need solutions," Dalton said softer now, almost pleading. "Not shutdowns." "I'm working on them," Morgan said. "You're not hearing us," Connor barked. Dalton put a hand out, trying to calm him. "Bill." But Connor pulled away. "No. I'm tired of HQ acting like they understand what we face." The teenage girl on the bench flinched at his raised voice, and Morgan's eyes caught it the way her shoulders curled and the way she bit the inside of her cheek, the way she gripped her father's jacket sleeve. Connor's anger wasn't aimed at her, but she felt every word. And that did something new to Morgan, something that pierced deeper than the insults. Before she could answer, the operations room door burst open. A young supervisor, barely out of college, rushed in holding a printed fax sheet, blurry ink emergency format. "We got new guidance," he said breathlessly. "HQ wants you to reverse the cancellation order." His eyes darted nervously between Morgan and the staff. "Effective immediately." A wave of shock passed through the room. Dalton's daughter straightened her eyes, flicking to Morgan with concern. Connor gave a bitter laugh. "Of course they do." Morgan took the paper, scanning the text. It wasn't guidance, it was a command. The CEO had overridden her authority. The board wanted flights in the air, even if the storm's center was now projected to sweep straight over their air corridor. She lowered the paper pulse, thrumming. "These conditions are unacceptable. We cannot." Connor cut her off. "Why do you even care? HQ just told you to get out of the way." Someone else muttered, "Guess rank wins after all." The supervisor cleared his throat nervously. "Ma'am, they're expecting the reversal to go out in the next 5 minutes. Dalton stepped forward again, steady, worried, gentle, in a way that only made the moment hurt more. "You heard corporate. It isn't on you." Morgan shook her head. "Yes, it is." The pressure chamber tightened. Lightning flashed, throwing stark shadows across the room. The radio hissed with static. Somewhere a child started crying. She wasn't sure when her breathing changed, only that it did shallow quick the way it used to get when she was 15, and waiting by that Christmas tree for a mother who never walked through the door. She rubbed her thumb against the edge of her palm, grounding herself. Dalton's daughter watched her with wide, unblinking eyes. Not angry, not judgmental, just quietly wanting someone to do the right thing in a room full of adults tearing each other apart. "Morgan," Dalton said, voice low, "if you push back now, I know," she whispered. "You'll make enemies, already have, and the storm's getting worse." "I know, you can't fix corporate. I'm not trying to fix corporate." She felt Connor's glare burning into her. Heard someone curse under their breath. Felt the entire weight of the company pressing down on her shoulders. And still her eyes returned again to the girl. Because if she reversed the cancellations, the planes would launch into that storm. The girl's father would be out there on the ramp, helping push them back, soaked, freezing, at risk. The passengers would be in the air. The crews would be flying blind through violent cell merges, just like her mother had. Just like those last words she still played on her voicemail. Another thunderclap hit so loud it rattled the metal light fixtures overhead. Then came the announcement from the radio, the one that turned the tension knife-sharp. "This is Tower. Wind shear alert now. Active for runway 17. Repeating wind shear alert, active. Wind shear." The nightmare phrase. The thing that turned routine landings into catastrophes. The whole room froze. Connor lost some of his fire. Dalton's jaw tightened. The teenager clasped her hands in her lap, silently pleading for someone to make the call that would keep her father safe. Morgan stepped forward, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles blanched. Silence thickened, heavy and waiting. The pressure had built to its breaking point. And in the next breath, the entire future of that night teetered on whatever she said next. Wind roared against the terminal, like a living thing rattling the metal framework and humming through the vents. The room held its breath. One wrong call, and lives could be on the line. The wind shear alert still crackled from the radio speaker, repeating in a mechanical loop that made every face tighten. Outside the wide window, a regional jet sat at the end of the taxiway engines, already spooling for a departure that HQ had insisted upon. The flight crew had received the reversal order before Morgan could block it. They were preparing to roll. A handful of ramp workers' raincoats whipping in the gusts stood near the aircraft, bracing themselves against the storm, waiting for the final pushback signal. Morgan heard her pulse louder than the thunder. If that jet took off now. A memory surged up out of the dark, her mother's laughing voice on a voicemail she'd saved for 20 years. "Storm's moving fast, sweetheart. But we'll make it. Be home before midnight, I promise." She never made it. Morgan closed her eyes for half a second, swallowing the ache that rose sharp as broken glass. She had spent her entire adult life trying to outrun that night, scheduling herself into numbness, filling every hour so she'd never have to feel the old terror. But here, with the storm howling and dozens of people depending on a decision, that old fear became something else. Something steady. Something guiding. She lifted her head. "Get me tower frequency," she said. The supervisor blinked at her. "Ma'am?" "Now," she said. "Patch me through." Connor scoffed under his breath. Dalton watched her with cautious uncertainty. His daughter's hands were now clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. The supervisor hesitated only another heartbeat before grabbing his headset and making the connection. Static filled the room. "This is Amarillo Tower," a strained voice crackled. "Go ahead." "This is Morgan Hale Sky Vista Operations," she said, stepping forward, projecting her voice like she was born to do it. "You have a Flight 417 preparing for departure. You need to halt that takeoff immediately." A pause. "Then Flight 417 is cleared for departure per corporate override." Morgan's jaw tightened. "Listen to me carefully. You have wind shear warnings active. This storm is worsening by the minute. That aircraft cannot safely depart. I am issuing a systems-wide ground hold. Effective, immediately. We don't have authority to you do now." Silence. Only thunder answered. Morgan turned toward the operations staff. "I need ramp personnel pulled off the tarmac. Now. Bring them inside." Connor opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to throw another accusation, but Dalton beat him to it. "You heard her," Dalton barked. "Move!" He was already running toward the exit, grabbing his raincoat. Other workers followed, scrambling down the stairs toward the storm-battered apron. The teenage girl stood up automatically, eyes fixed on her father, fear etched across her face. "You stay here," Dalton called over his shoulder. "Don't move, Maggie." The girl froze, nodding. Morgan stepped closer to the radio. "Tower, I'm telling you that plane is not taking off with weather like this. You reverse the clearance, or I will issue a federal safety violation recommendation." That got their attention. But before Tower could reply, another voice cut in, panicked, breathless. Tower, this is ramp 2. We've got a situation. Gust pushed a fuel cart across the line, headed toward the 417. The room snapped into motion. Everyone lunged toward the window. Through the sheets of rain, the rolling cart was barely visible at first, just a dark shape skidding across the slick pavement. Then lightning split the sky, and the full scene flashed into stark clarity. The wind had caught one of the heavy metal carts, sent it spinning. It was bouncing, skidding directly toward the idling jet's left engine intake. If it hit the engine, debris would be sucked in. The engine would detonate. Fuel would ignite. Crew and ramp workers could die. Tower's voice burst through the speakers. Flight 417. Abort! 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 Cut engines. But the cart kept sliding, hurtling toward catastrophe. And right in its path, Dalton. He'd been trying to signal the captain to cut engines. He hadn't seen the fuel cart coming. Dad Maggie screamed, pounding on the glass with both hands. Dalton spun too late. The gust caught the cart again, shoving it straight toward him. No Morgan's voice came out raw. And then she was moving, running. Past the operations desk. Past Connor's stunned expression. Down the wet stairwell where cold air blasted upward in violent gusts. She shoved through the emergency exit and into the storm. Rain slapped her face, soaked her blazer, stung her skin like needles. The wind nearly shoved her sideways. Every instinct said, turn back. She didn't. Lightning flickered overhead, illuminating Dalton, bracing himself, arms up as the cart barreled toward him. Morgan sprinted across the tarmac shoes, almost slipping, breath tearing through her chest. She wasn't fast enough, she knew she wasn't, but she ran harder, lungs burning, feet slamming the pavement. She reached him just as the cart reached them. There was only one option, no time to grab, no time to shout. She threw her whole weight sideways into Dalton, tackling him to the ground. The cart slammed past them, scraping the fabric of her blazer and crashing into a wheel chock with a metallic howl. Dalton hit the pavement with a grunt beneath her. The engine's spool-down whine of Flight 417 shuddered through the air as the pilots cut power. Ramp crew rushed toward them. Someone grabbed Morgan under the arms. Someone else helped Dalton up. The world blurred with rain and adrenaline. Dalton steadied himself, chest heaving. He looked at her like he'd never seen her before. Why would you? Because you have someone waiting inside, she said, breath catching. And I know what it's like when they don't come home. His eyes softened, the understanding immediate and deep. She hadn't meant to say it. The words had ripped straight out of the place she kept locked up tight. But they were true, and truth had weight in storms like this. A shout rose from the terminal doorway. Daddy Maggie's voice cut like a bell. She ran toward them, soaked within seconds, skidding across the wet concrete before Dalton caught her. She wrapped her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. Dad, I'm okay, Dalton whispered, kissing the top of her head. I'm okay, baby girl. Then Maggie looked at Morgan. You saved him. Morgan felt something in her chest shift, an old rusted bolt turning loose. She didn't know what to say. She just nodded. The other ramp workers gathered around, looks of disbelief turning to something softer, more respectful. Even Connor, dripping wet and pale-faced, seemed shaken. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. People in your position don't. Morgan met his eyes. People in my position forget we're humans first. I'm done forgetting. In the distance, a klaxon sounded. Tower shutting down, remaining ground operations. Emergency lights flickered along the edges of the runway. Inside the terminal, passengers were pressed to the windows, some covering their mouths, some applauding without even knowing why. Word was already spreading. Morgan straightened, soaked from hair to heels, shaking slightly with adrenaline. Dalton placed a steadying hand on her elbow. You did the right thing, he said. No matter what corporate says later. Corporate, HQ, the board, all waiting for her to obey, to reverse the ground stop, to comply with orders made from warm offices far from danger. But now passengers were safe, crew were safe, ramp staff were safe. She'd bought them time to do the next right thing. The teenager watched her like she was something new, someone who wasn't just another suit from Dallas, someone who cared whether her father came home at night. And in that moment, with the storm tearing across the tarmac and the grounded jet slowly powering down, Morgan Hale finally understood the weight of the decision she'd made. The crisis hadn't passed, it had only shifted. But something else had shifted too. Because now everyone in that airport had seen what she was willing to risk. And the entire power dynamic between corporate and crew, between operations, and the front line between Morgan and the people who thought she was just another cog, had changed in a single rain-soaked moment. Footsteps splashed across the concrete behind her. The supervisor emerged, headset hanging around his neck, eyes huge. Ms. Hale, HQ is calling again. They're furious. They want an explanation. Morgan exhaled slowly, looking at the trembling girl holding her father's hand. She knew exactly what she was going to say, but she also knew that answering that call would trigger the turning point of everything that came next. A deep breath, a final look at the grounded jet, a glance back at the ramp workers staring at her with stunned gratitude. The consequence of her choice was just beginning. She turned toward the terminal door, ready to face whatever came. And as the thunder rolled over the runway, Morgan Hale walked back inside, no longer just the COO who'd arrived that afternoon. She walked in as something else entirely. Someone the whole airport had just witnessed. Become a hero. The terminal doors slammed shut behind her, sealing out the roar of the storm, but not the echoes of everything that had just happened on the tarmac. Water streamed off her blazer and darkened the carpet beneath her shoes. The entire operations room had gone silent, utterly unnervingly silent, when she walked back in. Dalton entered behind her, one arm wrapped tightly around his daughter, both of them soaked through. Ramp workers filed in after them, dripping, trembling faces drained from adrenaline. Even Connor, usually so quick with a biting remark, looked pale and shaken. All eyes were on Morgan. Not in anger this time. Not in irritation. Not as the corporate suit who'd marched in with orders. Something else. Something like stunned respect hung in the air. Maggie Dalton's daughter wiped rain from her face with trembling hands. Only minutes earlier, she had watched a runaway fuel cart nearly crush her father. Now she stared at Morgan the way a child might look at a firefighter walking out of burning wreckage. One of the gate agents whispered to another, "She really tackled him out there. Saved his life." Someone else murmured. The whispers grew rippling outward, but Morgan barely heard them. Her chest was still burning. Her hands shook faintly, a spillover of adrenaline. She pushed wet hair out of her face and took a steadying breath. Then the intercom phone on the wall rang. Shrill, demanding, the corporate frequency line. Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. Even the storm seemed to pause as thunder rumbled farther away. The supervisor glanced at her, terrified to touch the phone. "Ms. Hale, that's HQ." "I know," she said quietly. He swallowed. "They've called 6 times." Morgan nodded once. "I'll take it." But before she could reach the handset, a voice behind her said, "Hold up." Dalton stepped forward, leaving his daughter's side. He still looked shaken, still looked like he hadn't caught his breath, but determination settled over him. "You don't walk into that call alone," he said. "Not after what you just did." She blinked at him, unprepared for the shift in his tone. "It's my job to take responsibility," No, Dalton said. Responsibility goes both ways. You stood out there for us. Now we stand with you. Maggie nodded fiercely at his side. Connor let out a long breath and stepped forward too, rubbing the back of his neck. I've been hard on you, he muttered. Thought you were just another HQ puppet. Didn't think you cared about what happens down here. He hesitated. But you proved me wrong out there. More staff moved closer. Agents, mechanics, supervisors, until Morgan was surrounded. Not boxed in, protected. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. The emotional weight of it, their support, their reversal hit harder than the storm winds. Then the intercom phone rang again. She picked it up. "Hail," she said. Morgan, her CEO, snapped. "What in God's name are you doing out there? We ordered a reversal. You grounded the entire airport. And now I'm hearing rumors you physically interfered with ramp operations." She didn't look at the others. She stared out the window at the grounded jet, the streaks of lightning still carving the sky. "I prevented a catastrophic accident," she said, voice low but even. "A fuel cart nearly struck Flight 417's engine. If it had, we'd be handling body bags right now." "That is not your call," the CEO barked. "The board makes these decisions. You follow protocol." Morgan closed her eyes for a moment, letting the tremor in her chest settle. Protocol. That word had been her armor for years, her shield, her excuse, her prison. When she opened her eyes again, the rain-streaked window reflected something she hadn't seen in herself for a long time: clarity. "I followed the safety manual page for page," she said. "And I followed something else. Something I haven't followed in a long time: common sense. You're out of line." "No," she said quietly. "I'm finally in line with the people who keep this company running." The CEO went silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, colder, strategic. "We'll discuss this at headquarters. Effective immediately, you're on temporary suspension pending review of your actions tonight." A few staff members gasped. Maggie's hands flew to her mouth. Connor muttered something under his breath, angry and low. Morgan didn't flinch. Understood. She hung up. The click echoed through the room like a gunshot. Dalton stared at her, stunned. "They suspended you after you saved." "It's fine," she said softly. It wasn't fine, but she didn't regret a single thing. She stepped back, letting the weight of everything settle. The storm beat against the windows again, wind rattling the frames. Then Maggie stepped forward. She was shaking, but she lifted her chin and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "My dad's alive because of you." The entire room seemed to still. The teenager took a trembling breath. "You didn't have to run out there. Nobody else would have. But you did. And I watched you. You didn't even think. You just went." Something in Morgan cracked, just a hairline fracture, but enough to make her exhale a breath she'd been holding for years. "I couldn't lose someone again," she whispered, before she could stop herself. Dalton frowned. Again, she closed her eyes, bracing for the old pain. "My mother was a flight attendant." She said the words pulled out like threads she'd kept knotted tight. "She died in an accident on Christmas Eve when I was 15. They pushed through a storm they shouldn't have. She never came home." The room fell silent. Not out of awkwardness, out of understanding. Pain recognizes pain. Loss recognizes loss. Dalton's face softened, and Connor looked devastated by the revelation. Maggie blinked rapidly. "You were trying to protect us, because nobody protected her." Morgan nodded once, and because she added quietly, I promised myself I'd never let weather take someone else's family from them, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book. Dalton let out a shaky breath. Why didn't you tell anyone? Because she said for corporate vulnerability is weakness. And I was too busy being what they wanted to remember what I promised my 15-year-old self. The room shifted. Morgan wasn't the outsider anymore. She wasn't the corporate enforcer. She wasn't the woman who arrived in a private jet to lecture them. She was one of them, a person who lived with the consequences of aviation in her bones. Connor stepped forward slowly. We were wrong about you, Hale. All of us. He swallowed. And I'm sorry. Dalton nodded, resting a hand on her shoulder with quiet sincerity. You've got more guts than half the people in corporate combined. She managed a small smile. That's not a high bar. That earned a laugh, light relieved, cutting through the tension. But it didn't last long. The supervisor rushed forward again, holding a new printout, this one marked Urgent. Ms. Hale, Tower just forwarded this. He handed her the paper. The FAA wants a full incident report. They're sending regional leadership to review Amarillo's safety protocols first thing in the morning. A ripple of anxiety swept the room. Morgan scanned the message. Her heart didn't sink. It steadied. This wasn't punishment. This was opportunity. They're coming here, Connor asked nervously. Morgan nodded. Yes, and they'll want answers about why Flight 417 nearly became a headline. Dalton frowned. You think they'll shut us down? Morgan shook her head slowly. No, I think they want to know what saved us. The staff exchanged confused glances. Maggie stepped closer. What does that mean? It means, Morgan said, lifting her gaze to the team gathered around her, that everything you did tonight, everything you've been doing for years matters. Safety, preparedness, refusing to cut corners, routine checks that big headquarters ignores. She tapped the report. Now the FAA wants to see it, and they're going to hear the truth. Connor blinked. The truth. That a group of exhausted, underfunded, short-staffed ramp workers still caught what corporate didn't. That their decisions saved a plane full of people. And that the only reason we avoided disaster is because local crews trusted their instincts more than someone looking at spreadsheets. The room went dead still. Then Dalton crossed his arms, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're going to tell them that I'm going to testify to it, Morgan said. Every word. The shock in the room shifted to something else, hope. Real, tangible hope. Dalton let out a breath as if releasing 10 years of tension. Maggie's shoulders dropped in relief. Connor nodded slowly, respect replacing resentment. And the supervisor, who had trembled taking that first phone call, straightened his posture for the first time all night. Morgan looked around at the people she had nearly lost, the people she had fought for, the people who had seen her. Something new took shape inside her, solid, steady, immovable. The suspension didn't matter. Corporate outrage didn't matter. The storm outside didn't matter. What mattered was the chance to honor her mother's memory, not by burying herself in work, but by standing up for the people who kept passengers safe every day. She folded the FAA message carefully. Then she spoke so everyone could hear tomorrow morning. When leadership gets here, we show them exactly who keeps this airport running and why they deserve better. Dalton nodded. And what about HQ? Morgan smiled faintly. HQ can wait. The storm thundered again, but it no longer sounded threatening. It sounded like a turning point. And when Morgan Hale looked out the window at the grounded jet and the lightning carving the sky, she no longer felt like the woman who had arrived hours earlier. She felt like someone finally stepping into who she was meant to be. And tomorrow, everyone, including corporate, would see it. The storm finally moved east sometime near dawn, leaving the runways soaked and gleaming under a pale gray sky. By the time the FAA officials arrived, clipboard in hand, jackets zipped to their chins, the airport staff had already gathered in the small conference room near Gate 2. Morgan sat at the end of the table, still suspended, still unsure what the next hours would bring. But when the FAA team asked for a full account, something remarkable happened. It wasn't Morgan who spoke first. It was Dalton. He stood one hand resting on the back of a chair and told them in clear, steady words exactly what he'd seen, how the gust hit, how the cart moved, how Flight 417 was seconds from disaster. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't glorify it. He spoke like a man describing the hardest truth he'd ever lived through. "She saved my life," he said, nodding toward Morgan. "If she hadn't made that call, and if she hadn't run out there herself, my daughter would have walked out of this room without a father." Maggie squeezed her father's hand and raised her chin. "And she saved everyone on that plane too." Connor spoke next, softer than she had ever heard him. "Look, I was wrong about her, about corporate, about a lot of things. But last night she put herself on the line when no one else did. You want the truth? She's the reason we're all standing here." The FAA team listened carefully, taking notes. And when they asked Morgan to speak, she rose slowly, steadied her breath, and didn't hold back. She talked about the storm, about the chain reaction of failures that nearly cost lives, about the culture that pushed speed over caution, and finally, quietly, about her mother. She didn't cry. She didn't let her voice break. But the room felt the truth of it. When she finished, no one moved. Then one of the FAA officials nodded. "We're not recommending disciplinary action against staff. Quite the opposite. This airport demonstrated exceptional judgment. Ms. Hale, your leadership under pressure likely prevented a fatality." Some of the workers let out relieved breaths. Dalton closed his eyes briefly. Maggie wiped her face with her sleeve. But it wasn't until the official added, "We will also be reviewing corporate directives that contradicted on-site safety," that Connor gave a low whistle under his breath. And Morgan exhaled for the first time since the night before. The meeting ended with handshakes and a quiet hum of pride that hadn't existed 12 hours earlier. As the FAA team left the room, slowly emptied agents, heading back to counters mechanics, returning to their hangars, ramp workers greeting the first passengers trickling in. Dalton lingered. "You know you're going to get a call from HQ," he said gently. "I'm sure," Morgan replied. "And I'm guessing it won't be a friendly one." She smiled faintly. "Probably not." But before she could slip out the door, Maggie hurried up to her, a folded piece of paper clutched in both hands. "This is for you," she said. Morgan opened it. Inside was a handwritten note, simple block letters, uneven but earnest. "Thank you for giving me my dad back." Morgan's throat tightened. She folded the note carefully and slipped it into her blazer pocket close to her heart. "What are you going to do now?" Maggie asked softly. Morgan didn't answer right away, because the truth was, she had no idea. 3 weeks later, the answer found her. The board had demanded her resignation. She gave it to them without a fight. No pleading, no panic, just clarity. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running on schedules or fear. She had space, silence, breathing room. And with each quiet morning, she realized how exhausted she had truly been. A month passed, then 2. Spring rolled in over Texas, warm and fragrant. Morgan found herself visiting Amarillo often, not as an executive, not with a badge, just as a person who'd made friends in a storm. She helped Dalton's crew revise their emergency procedures, sat in on training sessions when invited, passed out bottled water to ramp workers on hot afternoons. Maggie started calling her Captain Caution, which made Morgan laugh every time. Then one morning, as she was reviewing a draft of a new regional safety proposal she'd been tinkering with, the airport director called her into his office. "We've been talking," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. "The FAA's restructuring regional oversight. They want someone who understands both operations and real-life consequences. Someone who doesn't hide behind spreadsheets. Someone who's earned trust from the ground up." He pushed the folder closer. "We want you to lead the new Regional Aviation Safety Council." For a moment, she couldn't speak. All she could think of was her mother's voice, warm, certain. "Be home before midnight, sweetheart, I promise." Morgan blinked back the sting in her eyes and nodded. "I'll do it." 1 year later, Amarillo's airport looked different. Not bigger, not richer, just stronger. A new training bay for emergency simulations, safer ground protocols, seasonal weather preparedness programs, and a wall dedicated to the ramp workers who had saved lives that Christmas Eve. Dalton stood on a ladder near the wall's center, hanging a framed photograph of Flight 417, taken the morning after the storm, its silver body reflecting soft sunrise. Maggie, taller now, and wearing a volunteer badge, handed him the next frame. "Careful," she warned. "Ms. Hale's coming. She'll notice if it's crooked." I heard that Morgan called from the terminal doorway carrying a box of freshly printed safety manuals. And for the record, crooked signs save no one. Dalton climbed down, smiling. "How's the council treating you? Best job I've ever had," she said honestly. "Turns out saving people feels better than saving quarterly numbers." Maggie grinned. "Captain Caution rides again?" Morgan nudged her gently. "You need new material." But when she looked at them, father and daughter standing in the terminal, bathed in warm afternoon light, she felt something she hadn't felt in decades. Peace. A different kind of promise fulfilled. The kind that doesn't fit on a calendar. She placed the last frame on the wall herself, a simple plaque with a short inscription. "In honor of the night, everyone remembered what courage looks like." That evening, as passengers bustled through the terminal and the sun dipped low over the runways, Morgan stepped outside and watched a plane lift into the sky, smooth, steady, safe. She didn't flinch. She didn't tense. She didn't hear ghosts. She just breathed. And as that silver aircraft climbed above the clouds, she let a quiet truth settle in her chest. Sometimes the storms that stop us are the ones that finally set us on the right path. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is choose presence over speed.